As the flight attendant's icy voice cut through the cabin, Emma felt every eye land on her swelling belly and flushed cheeks. All she'd asked for was a second pillow to ease her aching back, but the blonde woman's disdainful sneer suggested something far more offensive was at play. A flush of humiliation burned in Emma's chest as she reached for her phone, her fingers trembling with an odd mix of anger and determined calm. "They won't give me a pillow," she texted her husband, David. "The flight attendant just humiliated me in front of everyone." The reply came almost instantly. "Who?" As the passengers averted their gaze, feigning ignorance to her public shaming, Emma couldn't help but notice the snap judgments being made about her place. What the flight attendant didn't realize, what no one on the plane knew, was exactly who she'd chosen to mistreat today. Emma's heart sank as the flight attendant's frigid tone shattered the airplane's quiet. Every passenger's gaze seemed to lock on her, lingering on her pregnant belly and rosy face. She'd only asked for an extra pillow to ease her back pain, but the flight attendant's blonde, blue-eyed sneer made it clear she'd committed some unforgivable transgression. The condescension was palpable, burning through her as she simmered in silent fury. With trembling hands, she pulled out her phone and texted her husband, David. "They won't give me a pillow." Flight attendant just made a scene in front of everyone. His response was swift. "What happened?" An awkward silence blanketed the cabin as passengers pretended to be engrossed in their books or movies, avoiding eye contact with Emma, who felt more isolated than ever. Little did the flight attendant know that she had just crossed paths with the airline owner's wife. We've witnessed countless moments of power shifting unexpectedly, but watching Ms. Thompson's color drain as she discovered her passenger's husband owned the entire airline was perhaps one of the most satisfying reversals of fortune we've ever seen. I've kept the narrator's comment, slightly rephrased for a more natural flow. In the first-class cabin, the atmosphere was strained, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Emma. 7 months pregnant and exhausted from a long day, she shifted uncomfortably against the single pillow that wasn't nearly enough to support her aching back. Every movement from the baby reminded her why this trip was necessary. David was waiting for her, and nothing would stop her from getting to him. Ms. Thompson, with military precision, stood ramrod straight, her blonde hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her features into a perpetual look of judgment. Her blue eyes had already swept over Emma with unmistakable disapproval even before she opened her mouth. "First-class amenities are limited, ma'am," Ms. Thompson announced, her voice just loud enough for nearby passengers to overhear. "We can't just hand out extras because someone requests it." The way she emphasized someone carried the heavy implication that Emma was an interloper in a space she didn't belong. Several passengers glanced over, then suddenly became engrossed in their magazines or screens. "I wouldn't ask if I didn't need it," Emma replied, trying to keep her voice level while feeling a flush of embarrassment creep up her neck. When Olivia, a younger flight attendant with dark, curly hair and sympathetic eyes, attempted to intervene, Ms. Thompson immediately silenced her. "I think I know my job, Olivia," she snapped. "We have to maintain fairness." What struck Emma most wasn't Ms. Thompson's rudeness. She'd encountered that before, but the deafening silence from everyone around her. Not a single passenger spoke up. Their collective silence felt like validation for Ms. Thompson's behavior. Emma's fingers danced across her phone screen. David's response came with lightning speed. "Flight number?" There was something powerful in those simple 4 words. Emma understood her husband. His quiet authority and methodical approach to problems meant he didn't need to raise his voice. At the front of the cabin, Ms. Thompson poured herself a cup of coffee, muttering, "Some people just think they're more important than they are." Olivia frowned and said, "She's in first class. She is important." "That doesn't mean anything," Ms. Thompson scoffed. "First class or not, we have policies to follow." What Ms. Thompson failed to understand was that there were certain policies specifically for passengers like Emma, pregnant women who needed basic comfort during a flight. Instead, she had created a scene based on her own assumptions. A few agonizing minutes passed before an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Ms. Thompson, please report to the cockpit immediately." The entire cabin went silent. Every passenger sensed the shift in the atmosphere as Ms. Thompson walked forward, her confident stride suggesting she was still completely unaware of what awaited her. Inside the cockpit, Captain Miller sat in silence next to a video call with Michael Johnson, a senior executive at the airline. Ms. Thompson's practiced smile faltered as she took in Johnson's expression. "The problem, Ms. Thompson," Johnson said coldly, "is that we've received a complaint directly from executive headquarters. A first-class passenger was mistreated on this flight." Ms. Thompson adjusted her uniform. "There must be some misunderstanding. I was simply enforcing policy." Did you check her ticket before deciding she wasn't entitled to an extra pillow? Johnson's tone sharpened. I did check, Ms. Thompson replied, although her hesitation betrayed the lie. But I was ensuring fairness among the passengers. The woman you refused a pillow to is Emma Williams, Johnson continued. Do you know who her husband is? The silence stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Her husband is David Williams, the owner of this airline. Everything inside Ms. Thompson seemed to collapse. The owner's wife, the pregnant woman she had humiliated, was married to the man who signed her paycheck. Johnson concluded, when this flight lands, you will be having a face-to-face with corporate. Ms. Thompson felt unsteady as she made her way back to the first-class cabin. Every eye was on her. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. She approached Emma's seat and attempted to adopt a conciliatory tone in her voice. Ms. Williams, it appears there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to personally offer you an extra pillow. Emma's steady gaze pierced through Ms. Thompson's facade. So now you're saying it's a misunderstanding? Yes, Ms. Thompson sputtered, her voice shrinking smaller than before. You didn't ask anyone else if they deserved to be here, Emma replied, her voice calm but laced with pain. You didn't question whether the man sitting across from me had the right ticket. You just assumed I didn't belong. The phone conversation a few moments later between Ms. Thompson and David Williams did nothing to improve her situation. You were going to tell me, David said, his tone dangerous, why my very pregnant wife was made to feel like she didn't belong in first class. I wasn't targeting her, Ms. Thompson feebly protested. I was just following company policy. Did you check the first-class manifest before questioning my wife's presence? David inquired. No, Ms. Thompson conceded, feeling herself shrinking with each passing second. You didn't ask the businessman across from her for his ticket. You didn't ask the elderly woman in 2C if she belonged there. What made you decide that my wife, my pregnant wife, wasn't worthy of common decency? The answer was unspoken between them, undeniable. Ms. Thompson had seen Emma and made an assumption based solely on appearances. When this flight lands, David continued, you'll be escorted off the plane for a full review. And believe me, Ms. Thompson, you're not going to like the results. For the remainder of the flight, Ms. Thompson stayed completely away from the first-class cabin. The familiar authority she had wielded for years had evaporated, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. Every passenger who had witnessed her behavior now regarded her with a newfound wariness. As the plane began its descent, Emma received another text from David. Security is waiting at the gate. Stay put when the doors open. This mic drop was iconic, the moment Ms. Thompson's career imploded. As passengers usually rushed to gather their belongings, an unusual stillness prevailed. Everyone was waiting. Then, a uniformed security officer boarded the plane. Ms. Thompson, he called. Heads turned as Ms. Thompson emerged from the galley, her face ashen. This was no longer a private matter. It was a public removal. You need to come with us, the officer said. Executive management has requested to speak with you directly. Ms. Thompson's walk down the aisle became a public acknowledgement of her downfall. She had humiliated Emma earlier in this flight, and now she was experiencing the same journey in reverse, her own mortification on full display. After Ms. Thompson departed, Mr. Anderson, the businessman who had been previously silent, leaned over to Emma. That was remarkable, really, he said. Emma turned to look at him, her face unreadable. What was? What happened to the flight attendant? He stammered out an explanation. Well, seeing her escorted off the plane like that. Mr. Anderson looked away, suddenly fascinated by his watch. You all sat here and watched her speak to me that way, Emma continued, and not one of you said a word. But now that you know who I am, suddenly you're interested. A woman a few rows in front turned slightly. I should have said something, she muttered. Yes, you should have, Emma replied simply. She wasn't seeking validation or apologies from strangers. What mattered was that something had shifted within them, and perhaps next time, someone would actually speak up. The jet bridge door opened, and David stepped on board, tall and imposing in a tailored black suit. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned the space he occupied, because he literally did. The passengers who had previously ignored Emma now sat up straighter, suddenly aware of whom they were sharing the cabin with. David focused only on his wife as he extended his hand. Let's go, honey. Let's go home. Outside, two airline executives were waiting while Ms. Thompson stood, face ashen, awaiting her fate. She was no longer in control, no longer an authority, just an employee under review. In the car, Emma finally relaxed into the leather seats. So, what's going to happen to her? She asked. She's been suspended pending a review by the board, David replied, his jaw tight. But frankly, she won't be back. Emma nodded, But her thoughts weren't solely focused on MS. Thompson. She was thinking about all the people who had been in her situation without a David Williams to set things right. As if reading her mind, David pulled out his phone. Yes, this is David. I want a new policy implemented immediately. Mandatory bias training for all first-class flight crews, increased oversight regarding passenger treatment, and a new complaint system that doesn't require someone to be married to the CEO to actually be heard. David Williams wasn't just fixing the problem. He was changing the system to prevent it from happening again. You really don't like loose ends, do you? Emma smiled, reaching over to squeeze his arm. Not when they involve my wife, he replied with a wry smile. As their car pulled away from the terminal, Emma felt the tension she'd been carrying since takeoff finally dissipate. MS. Thompson was gone, the flight was over, and somewhere in corporate headquarters, a new policy was being drafted, a policy that ensured the next Emma Williams wouldn't need a powerful husband to be treated with basic respect. That evening, as Emma enjoyed her favorite seafood pasta at home, her phone vibrated with a forwarded email. Subject, termination notice, MS. Thompson. I guess it's official, she mused, showing David the screen. He barely glanced at it. It had been official the moment she'd been escorted off the plane. David took her hand, his expression turning serious. If this ever happens again, if anyone ever tries to make you feel that small, I don't care if it's a flight attendant, a board member, or the president of the country, no one is allowed to treat you that way. With David, it wasn't just talk. It was a promise that he would always protect her, always stand by her, and always fight for her when necessary. I know, Emma replied softly, because she did. That night, as she snuggled into their couch, the stress of the flight, of MS. Thompson, and of the entire exhausting ordeal, melted away. All that mattered now was home, safety, and the knowledge that justice, in its own way, had been served. A few weeks later, Emma received an unexpected email. Thank you from Flight 378. It was from Olivia, the young flight attendant who had tried to help her that day. After what happened, the airline has completely overhauled its training program, Olivia wrote. Every employee now learns how to recognize when policies are harming instead of helping. Your stand that day changed everything, not just for MS. Thompson, but for all of us. Emma smiled, placing a hand on her now larger belly. The incident had taught her something profound. Power wasn't just about who you knew or what position you held. It was about refusing to accept mistreatment in silence and holding people accountable when they failed to see the humanity in others. Sometimes, the most important changes start with a simple request for a pillow. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and wish things had gone differently? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, hit the like button and subscribe.